Order. Welcome to the Public Accounts Committee on Thursday, the 15th of May 2025. Work coaches in job centres play a critical role in identifying needs and providing support for benefit claimants. A shortage of work coaches in job centres is limiting support available to the increasing number of universal credit claimants, with over half of job centres scaling back their services to manage workloads. The proportion of claimants in intensive work search category moving into work has fallen in the past 3 years, and there is substantial variation across the country. There are also concerns about significant changes set out in plans to reform employment support, bringing together DWP's job centres and National Careers Services, which is an initiative led by the Department for Education. We will be looking at this issue carefully in the session today, as well as challenging the Department on the shortage of work coaches to support people into work and examining performance. So to help us with all that quite complex stuff, we're very pleased to have a return of the Permanent Secretary, Peter Schofield, KCB. You've been in the role, Peter, since 2018, so you're a seasoned Permanent Secretary by now. And before that, you were Director General for Finance at DWP. We've also got on Peter's my left, Barbara Bennett, Chief Executive and Director General of Jobs and Careers Service, and Barbara was appointed to Chief Executive and Director of Jobs and Careers Service Operations recently in March 2025. So you're very brave to come here already in such a short time in your new job. But very warm welcome as the first time appearance.
I should say Barbara's been in the role of DG Operations for a couple of years before that. So
right.
It's not completely fresh to...
No, good. And finally, but by no means least at all, is Katherine Green, Director General for Labour Market and Poverty, and Katherine was appointed to Joint Director General for Labour Market and Poverty in November 2024 in a jobs share with Sophie Dean. How did you decide which of you was coming?
It's a Thursday, so it's
very good, well done. And we're also very pleased to welcome Joanna Baxter with us, who's member of the Work and Pensions Committee, and they've done inquiries of their own, and so I'm sure she will bring a useful wealth of knowledge to this hearing. So without any further ado, Permanent Secretary, I think you have been warned that we will be raising a question about one of our Treasury Minute recommendations and your rejection of it. So hopefully you have been warned of that.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Excellent. So I'm going to turn to my excellent Deputy Clive Betts to ask you about it.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Permanent Secretary. I hope, having been warned, you can actually come back with more positive news for us on this matter, because I think the issue we raised was the concern about the length of time it took to process PIP claims. And these are claims which are really important to people, obviously people with disabilities who really need that support and assistance. And there's a target of dealing with these claims within 75 days, but only about half of the claims were processed in that time. I think we said in our previous recommendation, could you give us a time period when you'll actually start hitting the target of 75 days for most of these claims? You came back and said you disagreed with that recommendation. Why is it so hard to give us a time frame?
It's the specifics of the wording of the recommendation. I do understand why the committee is pressing me on this matter, and as you say, Mr. Betts, this is an important part of our service line. I mean, the good news is that we are gradually improving the clearance rate of PIP claims. As you say, we're now up to 52% that are cleared within 75 days, which is the standard. To go beyond that, I mean, we're doing this in the face of big increases in applications for PIP. The caseload since that standard was set is something like double what it was before, and there's an 80% increase in the year-on-year claims that we're getting. So we're seeking to do this in the face of big demand. And the way to deliver this, as we discussed at the previous hearing on customer service, the way to make big strides in this area is not to try and find more colleagues to put onto this, because as this report says, there are limits to the number of colleagues and resource I can put into kind of doing things the same way. The solution, as we've delivered on universal credit and on the state pension, is transformation. So the answer to the question is the health transformation programme, but that is being rolled out over the next 4 years. So it doesn't... I know the committee is asking for something a bit sooner than months, more like months rather than years, but that's the reality of where we are in terms of delivering progress on this. That is more than the incremental improvements that we've seen so far.
Right, so the target then, you're saying, is it's going to take 4 years to get 75% of the claims dealt with in 75 days.
Well, no, my point is to make a big step improvement when you've got such a big increase in the number of PIP applications coming in, takes transformation, takes rapid change. One way is to put more and more people onto this, but we simply can't afford to do that in the current constraints that we're in. The solution, as we talked about when I was here before in December, is transformation, and the transformation programme that will deliver change in PIP is the health transformation programme that we've talked about with the predecessor committee here, and that will make rapid progress on things like being able to apply online, because we allow, within the 75 days, we allow about 20 days for the whole process of a claimant to fill in the application form and send it back in the post. When we've rolled this, where we've been able to roll out the early PIP online service that we're developing at the moment, it's made a massive difference to that. But my point is that won't be rolled out fully across the country until the completion of the health transformation programme, which is in the years running up to 2029.
Why does it take 4 years to roll out the transformation programme?
Well, I'll refer you to the hearing that we had on this a couple of years ago in this committee and the full conversation that we've had. There are 2 million claims that we do, 2 million health assessments that we do every year. The existing contracts run until 2029. The health transformation programme is developing new ways of delivering the service in different parts of the country on a trial basis. We'll roll this out gradually over the course of the rest of the commercial contracts that we've got. But the full service can't be in place until the end of these current contracts, which is 2029.
I'm a bit confused, just coming at this anew. If you can roll it out in part of the country, why can't you roll it out more widely? It's presumably the same sort of rollout.
Because the whole process is one of testing and learning as we go along and working out what is the best way, not just because what we're trying to do is an end-to-end service. So a service, you can send the application form off and get it back rapidly, but then you need to have people working in a different way to manage that process further downstream, so the whole end-to-end process works more effectively.
Wow. Will there be parts of the country where this time frame is hit in terms of the 75?
Yeah. So where we in the postcodes where we've rolled out PIP online, we're seeing much more rapid progress. I mean, I can write to you in terms of those places.
Happening, is it?
That's already happening in some postcodes.
So there are postcodes where you're hitting the target now.
Yeah.
Right. And I suppose the other question that everyone's probably thinking about is, well, if 75% are dealt with in 75 days, currently 52%, how long do the longest claims take to process? Mm-hmm.
Well, remember, it's not just about the speed at which you manage the case. So in some cases, the case is delayed because the claimant wants an appointee or a supporter to help them fill in the form. So we allow time for that. In some cases, it's a very complex case where we're looking for more evidence from medical professionals, so that takes longer as well. So, I mean, one of the points I made in the response to in the Treasury Minute is there's also a question here about getting the right decision and sometimes waiting for the evidence or enabling the claimant to have someone around them to help them fill in the form in the way they want to gives a better result overall.
Right, so didn't quite.
So it's not just.
Well,
no, I suppose my point is, you could push this, and you might end up with the wrong outcome, which is that people don't have time to fill in the form and don't have time to get the support that they need.
Right. So, just put it in a further context. Obviously, there are proposed changes to to PIP, to eligibility, and to the process. I think everyone accepts the form is incredibly complicated for many people to deal with. So is that an aspect of reform which could lead to speedier and more effective decision making?
Yes, I mean already the PIP online process, because it's a more intuitive process. So where you answer a question and the next question isn't relevant, you'll bypass a whole load of questions that will take you to where you need to go to. So already we can see that it's a more effective process where we do that. And as we roll this out more effectively, then we'll see more of that.
Right. So if there are changes under the welfare reform proposals that are going to come before Parliament in the not too distant future, will that speed the process up? I mean, you can hit these targets more easily.
Well, the Secretary of State announced on Monday a review in the way that we deliver the PIP assessment. So that's one of the things we're working with stakeholders on. Minister Timms is working that through with round tables over the coming period, and we'll have more to say on that in due course.
But that could lead to a more effective processing of these claims.
Oh, ideally, yes, absolutely. The whole idea here is, and I've said this before, we want the PIP process, which I regard as being a really difficult process. I mean, I've sat with people filling in the form, and some of the questions that we have to ask people are really difficult and intrusive. The whole process is one that causes some concern and worry with people. I really want to change that and improve that. And that's one of the things the Health Transformation Programme has been trying to do. And the PIP review that the Secretary of State announced will be trying to do the same. But it's not necessarily just about speeding up the process. It's about making the process one that people understand better, they have more confidence in, more trust in, one that gives the right answer more often, one that is delivering a better service overall for customers.
So when eventually decisions are made about whatever we're going to do with PIP in the future, you'll be able to give us clearer answers then about what the effect will that be on processing arrangements and times.
Well, what I suggest, Mr. Betts, is I write to you with a bit more about how PIP online makes a difference to the clearance rates, because I think I can understand the concern the committee has on that. And then we'll be able to keep the committee up to date as we roll out the Health Transformation Programme, and more broadly as the PIP review reaches conclusions in terms of streamlining the process and improving it for customers.
I think that's very helpful, Permanent Secretary. Thank you. We often in this committee examine when things are going wrong, but you very helpfully produced this letter this morning about your increased fraud detection. I don't want to spend too much time on that. There's quite a lot of detail in there. So first, can you confirm that this is in the public domain? Can we publish this?
Yeah, it was published as a national statistic at 9:30 this morning.
Brilliant. I mean, is there sort of in a soundbite? Is there anything you want to say on that?
Yeah, I mean, this committee has regularly challenged me in terms of progress on driving out fraud and error in the benefit system and talked about some of the measures that we're taking. I'm glad to say we've seen some of the benefit of that coming through. So the overall fraud and error across the benefit system has fallen from 3.6% last year to 3.3% in the year just gone, so from 23-24 to 24-25. The biggest single mover in that was universal credit, which fell from 12.4% to 9.7%, so 25% reduction. It is almost down to where it was pre-pandemic, which was 9.4%. But obviously, there's more to go at. We've got a fighting fraud and error plan. There's legislation in front of Parliament at the moment. There are things that we are doing to drive further. So it's a promising first step. We want to go further. We want to drive out fraud and error to below the level that was pre-pandemic and beyond if we can. Grateful to Parliament for considering the measures that are currently in front of it.
Well, thank you very much for that. It's something that this committee has paid attention to for over a number of time, and it's great to see it going in the right direction. So well done. Thank you. I now come to Chris Kane, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Sir Peter, Barbara and Katherine. Before I start, can I say I went for a visit to my local job centre in Stirling, and we're going to talk an awful lot about it, but I just would like to recognise the work that the staff are doing in centres around the country. They are working hard, and I think we should recognise that, and we'll talk about some of the pressures that they're under. But it was a really, really informative visit, and I'd like to put on record my thanks. I want to talk about work coaches, please. They play a critical role working directly with benefit claimants to identify the needs and provide support, but there aren't enough of them. That comes through in the report. So looking at paragraphs 2.17 through 2.21, which is where I want to concentrate my questions. DWP, this is 2.17, DWP allows job centres in some circumstances to reduce the support they provide for claimants. And framework for local flexibility has been introduced, and from September 23 to November 23 more than half of the job centres used the local flexibility framework at some point to help manage their workload. So Peter, how concerned should we be that over half of job centres have had to reduce their support for universal credit claimants due to the shortage of work coaches?
Well, thank you, Mr. Kennett. First of all, thank you for your comments about our colleagues all across the country. I couldn't agree more in terms of the excellent work that they do. As the report sets out, the demand for work coaches changes on a fluctuating basis. Figure 5 I thought was quite instrumental in that, which showed the demand moving quite significantly from one month to the next as different things happen in the labour market. And likewise, demand fluctuates between different parts of the country. So the reason we have a shortage is because we see fluctuations in demand that happen on a regular basis and that we forecast on a 6-monthly cycle. But the planning of resource is often over a longer time frame. So, for example, our departmental expenditure limit for 2024-25, the year just ended, was originally set in November 2021. And then, of course, you've got the situation in which every year when we look at our resourcing, we have to balance the work pressures for job centres against the pressures in other service lines. So there's always a judgment that we have to make. And if you'll see on figure 5, broadly speaking, over the last 12 months, we were able to smooth the recruitment and retention and supply of work coaches so that we were there pretty much. We weren't meeting all of the peaks, but we were meeting the broad trend in demand. It's become more difficult more recently because of resourcing constraints. So it's probably fair to say we'll never ever have exactly the right number of work coaches in any one place, and it fluctuates from time to time. The crucial thing for us then, getting to the heart of your question, is how do we make sure that if we have a shortage of shortage of work coaches, we manage that in a way that has minimal impact on service outcomes, and that is primarily getting people into work. So that is the purpose of the national changes that are set out in that chapter, and then the local framework that we've got. We want to leave local leaders the flexibility to make the right decisions in their areas according to their position in terms of work coach numbers and demand, but within a framework that means that we have consistency and that we minimise the number of minimise the negative impact of not having enough work coaches. So my answer to your question is, I don't think we should be concerned, because what we've done is we've made sure that where there aren't enough work coaches, we've reduced the frequency of interventions on the things that we think make least difference in terms of outcomes, primarily outcomes about getting people into work.
But at the start of your answer, you sort of described what I would imagine is normal planning for your department. You're going to get variations in job figures around the country, but you've introduced a temporary framework to, I assume, allow for a temporary change in this. But so your answer, to be fair, described how you would work under normal circumstances, but the framework seems to be here to work in abnormal circumstances. Can you speak to why the framework then was needed on a temporary basis, if, as you're describing it, is merely normal pressures that's led to that leads to the shortage of workforce?
Well, I suppose my point is that a shortfall of work coaches there may be a national average picture, but what you'll see locally is very different from that. Times when there are enough, times when there aren't enough. So you need to leave flexibility. So the temporary measure is a temporary sense in that the leader of that job centre can decide how far down that ladder of changes they need to go on a temporary basis to manage a temporary shortage of supply. Your point about is this a short-term, is your other question, is this a short-term flexibility to put in the overall system?
I suppose what I heard from your answer is this shortfall is a perfectly normal thing that's just to be expected, yet you have a framework, and we're seeing throughout the report that there is a huge workload. We'll come on to all of that, but the shortfall is having an impact, and staff is having an output and outcomes. But I heard this is just a normal everyday thing. Am I getting that right from your answer?
As you see from figure 5, if you look back over the last few years, you'll see that there have always been times when there have been not enough, averaged over the country, not enough work coaches to meet demand. What we've done more recently is put in place this framework that gives us a consistency of approach. And we are looking at whether this framework should be something that we keep in place over the longer term to give us that flexibility, but also a consistency in how we approach things.
Thank you. Can I ask Barbara some questions now? What impact has the reduction in support had on claimants?
The impact that the reduction in the support has on claimants has been minimised because the flexibility framework has deliberately been brought in to impact and to keep and preserve the core support that we give. So the flexibility framework has deliberately been created so that those that do need intensive work search support of 10 minutes, 20 minutes, etc. has been preserved. And so we've deliberately looked at those things that aren't needed.
You said it has been minimised, but what has been minimised? What is the impact, even if it's been minimised?
So we have made sure that across all of our job centres that the core regime that that the report talks about in terms of the evidence base that we know about how people get into work, we are comfortable that across all of our job centres the impact has been actively managed, as Peter says, to make sure that we are only focusing on the flexibility framework on those activities that don't impact getting people into work.
So if you see on figure 8, Mr. Kane, it sort of sets out the different levels, and the first thing that we reduce is that initial conversation with the claimant about their needs from 50 minutes to 30 minutes. We regard 30 minutes as sufficient to enable us to have a decent conversation with a new claimant about what their needs are, what their skills are, what their ambitions are, what the opportunities are. So we don't think that's going to make a massive difference or a significant difference at all to outcomes. And then if you look further down the table in figure 8, you'll see the variety of certain changes that we make. With the one that we moved to at the last resort, level 5, is moving all claimants in the intensive work search category to a fortnightly meeting after 13 weeks, rather than a weekly meeting for some of them. Again, we think we can still have the quality conversations on a regular basis and still achieve the same outcomes, even if we have to move to a level 5 position in the ladder.
Okay, I think we'll probably pick up on that. I'll look at that.
I think I'd like to just pick up on it now because it follows. And thank you for your excellent questions, Chris. I mean, reducing some of these standards does seem to me, I hear what you say, Permanent Secretary, but if I were a claimant sitting here, coming in with a very complicated form, only being able to explain to a work coach or whoever is interviewing me in 30 minutes. So not only is that work coach having to check all my data and criteria, he's then having to assess, he or she is then having to assess what what regime I need to go on to, all in 30 minutes. Is that really satisfactory?
Well, in that situation, and I've sat with work coaches in exactly that situation, where a conversation needs longer, then we'll allow longer, and we'll adjust the diary of the work coach often to be able to do that. The crucial thing is to get it right. So this is a framework that we put in place to give guidance to local leaders. But local leaders are always encouraged to do the right thing for their customers, and work coaches are always encouraged to do the right thing for their customers. So we try and make sure there's flexibility. Now, that's not always the case. I've seen work coaches whose diaries go all through the day and there's no gap. But by and large, we allow that flexibility. And absolutely, I couldn't agree more in that situation, Chair, where there's a situation where the customer needs longer, then the customer will get longer. I really want to make sure that happens.
And also the other thing is we find on our own surgeries, our own MP surgeries, some people who come to see us are much more articulate and marshalled with their thoughts than others. Others are naturally much more long-winded.
And one of the things we really want to do, stepping back a little bit in terms of what we're trying to do with the whole service as we develop the Jobs and Careers Service, is up until now we've had quite a rigid approach to the framework, and the rigid approach to the framework is based on robust analysis that the report sets out, goes back a number of years, about a good way of getting people into work and helping to achieve good outcomes. But where we need to get to is not lose those outcomes, but allow much greater flexibility in the way the system works. And some of the things we're trying out, we've got the 2 trials that are set out in paragraph 114 in the report, but other things that we're doing on a more agile basis all across the country. Trying new ways of working, a bit more flexibility here, a bit more flexibility here, there. What does that tell us about outcomes? How does that help us deliver a tailored service depending on the different needs of the customer? So that ultimately we can get to a position in which the resource that we put on is focused where it's most needed, And those customers, for example, who are motivated and able to self-serve, there's a digital journey to help them along the way. So we're part way in the process. Looking back, we have a rigid process that is based on evidence. We need to get the same outcomes with a more tailored approach that enables us to take the resource that we've got and to spread it further across a wider proportion of the population.
So we will be coming back to aspects of that answer, the national sort of expectations of work coaches and the digitalisation. But for now, back to Chris Kane, please.
Paragraph 2.21, DWP is examining whether some of the measures in the local flexibility frameworks could be made permanent. Can you tell me what sort of measures could be made permanent? When do you think you'll make a decision as to when that will be the case?
Okay, well, I mean, Barbara may want to say a bit more, but I mean, for example, the 30-minute claimant commitment rather than 50 minutes. Will we have found out actually that is sufficient? As I say, our analysis is that is something where we think we can have all the right conversations in time. But, is that something that we think we can roll out and make permanent all across the country and give time to do other things as part of the process of getting people into work? So any of these things, as we put them into place, as we see what the impact is of putting them into place, we can then take a view about whether we want to keep them as we go forward.
I think just to move us on, you might want to write us when you've decided what is going to be permanent and when it's going to be made permanent. I think that's what we're trying to get to. What will be made permanent and when will it be made permanent? So,
well, okay. So there's a phased approach to rolling out the Jobs and Careers Service, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But the two randomised controlled trials, so the major studies, they're referred to in paragraph 114. So the one using video and other channels as opposed to face-to-face, and the one thinking about flexing some of the frequency of engagement, they're quite long-term studies because you need to see what the long-term impact is of getting people into work and them staying in work. We expect them to conclude during the course of next year, and I'm sure we'll report back to the committee at that point.
Thank you. Can I move on now to funding and for work coaches? This is paragraph 11 and 2.12 of the NE report. You've not got the funding for the coaches that you asked for. Why? Why have you not secured enough funding to pay for the work coaches that you need?
Well, it goes back to my first point at the beginning of the conversation, that the departmental expenditure limit for DWP is set in spending reviews, and often those are on a multi-year basis. So the spending review for 2021 set budgets for the following 3 years. So over the course of time, sometimes the demand that comes through in practice is different from the demand that was assumed at the time that the budgets were set. So then you have a conversation we have amongst our executive team and with our ministers. When we set the budgets for each and every year, we then need to look overall. The demand for different service lines may be higher. We may need to put more resource into those areas. So it's a budgeting process where you're comparing the pressures that are coming from different parts of the organisation and making those decisions.
So it's a holistic conversation with the Treasury, and you're going back to them and saying, actually, we made a mistake, we didn't need as much, but we can take less.
Well, it's the way you're planning the resourcing of a major organisation, Mr. Kane, and you have to take into account the changing demands in different parts of the organisation. I'm just telling you, it says what I heard there was you saying we set a figure at month 1, then we realised at month 6 we needed less, and we changed, we adapted accordingly. Is that what you're saying? I'm saying our Dell budget is set in negotiations with the Treasury in a spending review based on certain assumptions that are made at the time, which we talk about with the Treasury. They'll be based on our best assessment of demand across all of our service lines, expectations about efficiency measures that we can make, maybe funding for new initiatives that the government agrees we should take forward, and those get comprised into a departmental expenditure limit, a total number for the whole department that is set from 1 year to the next over the following, in the case of the spending review in 2021, over 3 years. So then you get to the beginning of the relevant financial year and you say, well, this is our DEL that was set back in the spending review. How are we going to then allocate that DEL in order to make the most impact on our services? You might find a DEL pressure. I mean, Mr. Betts was asking me earlier about PIP, for example. There may be pressure to put more resource into PIP, to improve the service there to meet demand. Or there may be pressure to put more into Jobcentres. So that, at the end of the day, you're balancing things up, and at the end of the day, you may not have enough work coach numbers to meet the demand that we see at the time that the year begins.
Right, so it's the department's decision to reduce the number of work coaches needs rather than the funding following the decision for that. Okay.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Kane, the two follow, don't they?
Yeah. I'm just asking for clarification. I'm not. It's what I'm hearing, what you're saying. I'm just making sure I understand it. Can I ask?
We have a budget and we make a decision about how we're going to allocate the budget.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask about what you're doing to increase the number of work coaches? You've got the report talks about some of the regional variations in where you're managing to recruit and retain the staff. Can you talk to what you're doing to increase the number of work coaches?
Yeah, sure. And Barbara should talk a bit more about that actually. But clearly, when we've got this is the other thing that comes out in the report, is that you get the funding, then you need to make sure you've recruited and retained the work coaches. And that is a crucial job for us in terms of attracting and retaining and encouraging people to believe that DWP is a place where they want to work and they feel motivated by the purpose and values of DWP as an organisation. So there's a lot that goes into that in terms of how we attract and how we lead, and a lot of work to support line managers in different places. But Barbara, do you want to say more?
Yeah, really proud of some of the improvements that we've made over the last year or two around improving the recruitment and obviously the process that our potential work coaches go through, because it is, as you know and as you'll have experienced in Stirling Job Centre, it's quite a set of skills that we need. So we need to make sure that people, when they are going through the process, they know what the job will entail. It's quite tough what we're asking for our work coaches. So we've made a lot of efforts. We've created a microsite. We've been using local employment forums as well. We use things like armed forces hives as well to make sure that we take our jobs from lots of different types of customer cohorts as well. I think we also use specialist sites as well to make sure that we're recruiting from diverse backgrounds. And we've got a national and a local approach. So we want to make sure that nationally we've got the right number so that it ties in, as Peter says, with the demand. But actually we want to make sure, don't forget, our work coaches serve the communities that they live in. So we want to make sure that those work coaches really do emulate the needs. And we talk about performance, but actually the most important thing that we need from our work coaches is that they're able to deliver with empathy as well. So we spend as much time, and that's one of the improvements that we've made, that actually our work coaches we're recruiting really are have the right personal skills as well as the right technical skills to be able to do the job. And if they are invested in, as they have done, and we've made improvements in that space, then they're more likely to stay as well. So actually our attrition rates from regretted attritions are actually quite low, and actually the majority of our moves is around turnover. So they've gone to different types of roles within the organisation, or actually reducing their hours. But actually our regretted attrition, we're really glad that we've actually managed to reduce it, because we want to make sure that our work coaches come and that they stay and they deliver a really good service for our customers.
You're definitely getting it right in North East England and Scotland. The report says that what you estimate and what you've got in Scotland, you're 0.1% higher than what you estimated, so that's pretty much bang on as much as you'll get. But if you look at Southern England, you have got a shortfall of 12.3%. So can I ask you, what lessons can you take from the regions where it's working perfectly in terms of your estimates, meeting your expectations? What lessons can you take to apply to the rest of the country, and what specifically are you going to do, or are you doing, in regions like Southern England, which have the biggest shortfalls?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and actually this talks to some of the more environmental, societal impacts on attrition, as well as the things that we can do internally to increase retention. Our work coaches and our teams are subject to the same work pressures in the employment market that our customers are as well. And so if there are a high number of jobs available with the skills that we have, then there is a natural move around the country. So
into different roles. So one of the things that we've been specifically doing within Southern is we've done a particularly specific programme of retention. We have increased the amount of performance management to make sure that actually our teams know what's expected of them. But we've got things like the Aspire programme where we've got a leadership investment in terms of ensuring that our teams feel invested in. But actually I think there are some more macro impacts that South has. It has a very buoyant labour market, and so we do tend to see higher attrition in those areas where they've got buoyant labour markets, and we have to pedal even faster.
Okay, thank you both.
Thanks.
Clive Betts wants to come in, Permanent Secretary, with a question on resources for the department.
Yes, I understand, Permanent Secretary, you've got a budget that's fixed. You have to then decide how best to allocate it. But if there are particular possibilities for increasing efficiency and saving money, the Treasury can be persuaded to put extra resources in. We're thinking here of the sessions we've had with HMRC, where they got extra resources last autumn to deal with fraud and error there on the taxation system. Why couldn't you put a similar argument forward to get extra money for work coaches or fraud and error in the department, things that could actually have saved money?
We do, and we have. So on fraud and error, for example, we've had significant investment in every recent fiscal event, a similar way to HMRC. And on the labour market, we had £240 million additional in the autumn budget for Get Britain Working and driving that forward over the course of this year. And we can make cases as well for additional work coaches. That's happened in the past. But again, the Treasury will be balancing a whole range of different priorities across the board. And they will be looking at us to drive additional efficiency through the job centre network as well. So, you know, the report itself talks about some of the initiatives we've made to take cost out of the job centre network to free up more work coaches to work on frontline roles. So the example in here is the investment in technology to improve the process where a customer fails to attend. It used to be a very bureaucratic process. A work coach would then, having finished the time slot, would then have to go away and do a load of paperwork. That's been automated, and that's freed up, I think, according to the report, 250 work coach equivalent of time. So there are things that we can do and things the Treasury expect us to do, and there are and on fiscal events we've regularly seen additional investment in the labour market interventions that we've got. But we will still have a lack of flexibility in the way I've described to Mr. Kane, because the demand we review every 6 months, and that will change from one place to another, from one month to another, in the way that Figure 5 shows. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Clive, very much. Lloyd.
Thank you, Chair. And just to build on the sort of line of questioning that Chris was pursuing, one of the things that I found quite difficult to understand when going through the report was when you look at areas where there is a serious shortfall in the number of coaches, it often is only at quite a large level. We're unable to go down to that granular level. Could you perhaps explain in a bit more detail why it is that the DWP doesn't publish that information at a more granular level? My constituency falls within the Southern district of job centres, but we don't really have any more detailed information at that granular level, which means that you're unable to actually see if even within one of the worst affected areas when it comes to shortfalls, there could actually be some areas which are doing better and some areas that are doing even worse. So I'd never be able to know, for example, what's going on in my job centre in my constituency.
Yes, and I've been to the Weymouth Job Centre, fantastic job centre it is as well, amazing colleagues. There is more data. I mean, we've got a huge amount of data. There's always a question about how much data you publish. Our annual report and accounts, which this committee will be, I'm sure, talking to me about in due course. We publish it in a couple of months' time. It seems to be getting thicker and thicker as we publish more and more data, and a lot of data is available on Strat Explore, our kind of online system as well. So, I mean, if the committee is interested in more detailed, granular data, always happy to look at that, and very happy to write to you about the situation in Weymouth if you would like to know.
Further information, I definitely will welcome it for my constituency. I suppose the reason why I was raising it today, though, was just it's useful for us to, when we look at these quite large districts, to say, well, actually, this is one of the worst affected areas when it comes to a shortfall of coaches. Is it sort of fairly evenly spread, or are there sort of black spots, but also some areas where it's performing better? That's why it's helpful for us as a committee, but also more generally.
And Barbara should say more about that. I mean, one thing I would say, there is a lot of work that goes on supporting between job centres. So there are activities that don't need to be done face to face, which can be, so for example, colleagues in the northeast of Scotland might be helping out colleagues in London on some of the tasks that can be done in that way. But you're right, even within one district there'll be variation in the headcount numbers. But
we, as you'll expect, we monitor it on an individual job centre level, at a district level, etc., and especially as the report highlights. And we are really keen to make sure that where there is a shortfall, that other job centres, just building on Peter's point. So actually, we absolutely have asked the teams in Scotland to be able to support the teams in a few of our southern and our London job centres on those non-core activities that can be done virtually, and that helps us temporarily smooth the resource, but also means that we've got the opportunity to be able to learn as well. So from a leadership perspective, actually we've just moved one of our teams, for example, in Liverpool to be able to support the team in Birmingham, so that actually some of the activities that have worked in Liverpool are translating across to Birmingham. So it is really active, and I think one of the things that we do is we manage performance at all the levels, but also attrition at every level. And our teams want to be able to deliver the best service, so they will try everything that they can in order to be able to make sure at a leadership level that we do smooth that demand out. It's not easy. It's active. It's a weekly conversation that we have with our teams, and we do get there. But I think we have to make sure that we understand the nuances, because, for example, a Winchester job centre will be different from a Weymouth job centre, but they do talk to each other and they do collaborate. There is a lot of support actually within clusters, which is one of the reasons why we run a lot of our performance and our management information based on clusters and districts, and so they will try and solve things locally before they then go out to ask more widely, because I think there's also some of the journeys to work as well for our customers. Actually, given some of the transport links, for example, it could be easier to get to a Bournemouth from a Weymouth than it would be to get to maybe somewhere next door.
Yeah, that certainly would be the case in my patch. If you were able to provide any further information, that would be very, very helpful. So to move on, I suppose the big question is why do you find it so difficult to retain work coaches, and how are we going to look at addressing some of those challenges where we do have the biggest shortfall of coaches, such as in the southern region?
Yes, Barbara has picked up on it. The correlation between the sort of vibrancy of labour markets and the shortage is sort of something you see nationally and regionally, but also you see locally as well. The civil service doesn't always pay as well as some other employers in local areas. What we do have, though, is that sense of purpose and those sort of values that are the thing that draw people to want to be there and want to stay. So, for example, I spent quite a lot of the COVID pandemic working out of Ms. Paul's Redhill Job Centre, and what was lovely was just spending time with colleagues who had been there year after year, and I'm sure in a very vibrant labour market could have found other places to work, but they felt really attracted to the role, which is helping people into work and to move on in their lives. And I think the key point for me is, absolutely, it's got to be a working environment that people feel supported and content in, but also it's got to be people who are motivated by the core purpose of what DWP is all about.
Yeah, well, that certainly sounds like the strength, but what I'm asking for is to understand, what are the challenges, and I suppose how are you looking to reduce that? And also, if you could go into a bit more detail about why perhaps turnover is so high when it comes to people not actually sticking around that long as a job centre coach.
Yeah, Barbara wants to say more. I mean, I'll give you an example. We recruited really heavily during the COVID pandemic. We doubled the number of work coaches from 13,500 to 27,000 in a relatively short period of time. It was a massive period of expansion. Quite a lot of the people who we then recruited when the rest of the economy opened up and there were other roles, then decided that it wasn't for them and decided to move on, and we saw a reduction in the way that we needed to see, but also quite a number of people didn't want to stay because it wasn't the role for them. So sometimes it sort of goes with that sort of fluctuation. But, what are we doing? A lot of this is down to line management in local areas and the coaching that's done, and Barbara and her team do a huge amount of work on that.
So in Southern in particular, we know that there is that buoyant labour market. We know that the opportunity of alternative roles is there. That we know that and also one of the things that has happened in Southern, and we're seeing it actually as a national pattern, is actually because of the demographic of our work coaches, it's actually less about attrition, it's more about reducing the number of hours that they're working. And so we're having to deal with that as well, because actually that obviously adds to the FTE hours as well. And so as I said earlier to Mr. Kane, we are doing a lot more to try and make sure that we're using technology to in terms of attraction, and so websites like LinkedIn we're increasing. We've got a new microsite. We've just launched some personas so that you can see what work coaches currently doing the role are able to experience what the challenges are. We're also allowing people to come into the job centre. There's nothing more vibrant than going into a Salisbury job centre and really working with a work coach and seeing what the role is like itself. But also we've just changed the onboarding process and the early learning process as well, to make sure, because actually one of the issues is about dropout through the process as well. So we need to make sure that those upfront recruitment processes.
Just on that point, I mean, Peter sort of began to talk about the issues around pay compared to other job opportunities, particularly in certain regions, and then talking about dropouts there during the sort of initial period of starting the role. Those, as far as you're concerned, the two main reasons why retention can sometimes be a challenge. Would it be pay and struggling to keep up with other competitors when it comes to other employers, and then also people perhaps not completing that onboarding process and them dropping out at quite an early level? As far as you're concerned, are those the two biggest challenges when it comes to retaining work coaches?
Retaining, so I mean up front through the process, then actually there is that's more around keeping them through the recruitment process. The retention will be around salaries and also the availability of other roles in the locality. I mean, our retention in Scotland, for example, will definitely be different to our retention in the south, just because of the local labour market. And actually the retention isn't a national picture. So one job centre might have a new business that's opened in the locality. That will make a massive difference. I think also redundancies in the area as well have a key impact, and also whether or not there are new businesses that have sprung up where our work coaches might be interested in working as well. So yeah.
But I think there's a role for line managers in really giving that sense of purpose and the flexibility that people have to have a really kind of contented career in DWP. And as I say, work coaches I sit alongside, many of them have worked for DWP for many, many years and wouldn't want to work anywhere else because of the nature of what we do.
Thank you. If I might move on slightly, what I'm also interested in is looking at the existing workforce of coaches and how we enable them to be as productive as possible. I know that the report touches on a number of the significant changes that have been made to sort of reduce wasted time or particularly cumbersome administrative tasks using AI, particularly there. So could you perhaps go into a bit more detail about what more could be done looking forward, particularly of all of the changes that the government have proposed earlier this year to really improve the productivity of the existing coach workforce?
A number of headings in this that we could unpack, Mr. Hatton. So one is automating processes that are currently in place. So the same process, but automating it a bit more. So that failure to attend process I mentioned earlier is a great example of that, using technology to take some of the bureaucracy out of the process. The second is thinking about whether the processes that we currently apply need to be applied in a kind of one-size-fits-all type approach, or whether you can tailor them more effectively to different types of customer. So that's where a number of the tests that we've talked about in the report really come through. How do we work out which are the ones that are most effective and for whom, and how do we apply those? Then the third is then thinking about a broader range of customers who we could be reaching. So, for example, people who are on what we've called the universal credit health journey. Yeah. So people who are found not fit for work, the regime kind of leaves them alone, as you'll see in the report. But actually, about a fifth of them at least want to look for opportunities for work. So one of the things we've been doing is trying out additional work coach support, and we published an evaluation of that a couple of months ago, where we're providing some support to those people and seeing some returns from that. So those would be kind of three broad headings. I'm very happy to go into a bit more detail on any one of those three if you like.
No, that's really helpful. I suppose what would perhaps be useful for this committee to better understand is this a sort of systematic approach? Is this a strategy that will be implemented by the DWP to look at how we can make our existing coaches more productive? Or is this something that's just being picked up on a more ad hoc basis? Or is it actually a concerted piece of work?
I mean, it's right to what I said to the chair at the very beginning. This is at the heart of the National Jobs and Careers Service, what it's all about. It all comes together in a phased approach. We can go into that in a bit more detail. But those three elements that I described, and say we can go into that, any one of those in more detail, those are part of the overall strategy of building a new National Jobs and Careers Service that provides a tailored employment support for a range of people beyond those just in the intensive work search group in universal credit, but will crucially have to be done without kind of massive increase in resources, because that's the world that we're in at the moment. So how do we use digital solutions for those for whom that's the right way forward? How do we then focus our people on the things that only people can do most effectively, particularly those people with complex needs who need that support all along the way, particularly people with health conditions?
And are you confident that through greater digital resource, particularly AI, that we can really increase the productivity of coaches, particularly if there isn't going to be a huge increase in funding for job centres?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot already out there, and part of the process going forward is about working out what are the best solutions for our customer base. But I mean, Barbara, we've already got, the National Jobs and Careers Service has got its digital offer, our own offer as well.
So we've got a great example of where we're using Copilot in Slough, and actually that's helping work coaches with CVs, with cover letters, with skills, and that's already making a big impact. 60% of our job centres have got some kind of pilot where they're trialling something new, especially in this space. Productivity for me is about how do you free up the work coach from all of the non-face-to-face time in order to make sure that they maximise the time in front of the customer. So actually, as well as the Jobs and Careers Service looking at who are we seeing, where are we seeing, the frequency that we're seeing customers in the future, actually we're doing things now. So to answer your question, actually we have got a programme of work to have a look at. So I've trained all of my grade 6s and grade 7s on continuous improvement, exactly to answer that question.
So your Secretary of State, Barbara, in launching the white paper, said that you'd been given 55 million of extra funding to look at AI solutions. You're testing AI proofs of concept. Is that 55 million going into that programme, or is that for something else?
Yes, that's the 55 million is looking at two things at the moment. One is a coaching academy to look at actually how do we upskill our work coaches on what the Jobs and Career Service is going to be. But the majority of that at the moment, yes, is on digital programmes. What could digital nudging be? And actually we're excited about looking at public employment services internationally, where we're taking best practice to help accelerate some of our thinking and seeing what's happened in other countries.
But just to reassure the committee as well, there's a lot of enthusiasm. My investment committee sit over the 55 million and test the different proposals that come forward. So this is being used for a number of different things. We need to know that this is going to take us somewhere before we release the money. So it's being very carefully managed. I thought you'd want to know that. But lots of excitement in terms of some of the different things that we're trying as we do that.
Well, we will certainly want to come back to that. Lloyd, we've got a lot to cover. If you finished, Clyde Betts.
Yes.
Thank you, Lloyd, very much. Thank you.
We've talked about the differences between job centres and how they operate and what their performance is. And 2023 you brought in the performance framework to monitor their operation, but you haven't set any performance targets.
Well, so what the performance framework did is it took a greater focus on outcomes rather than inputs. That's the first thing to say. So previously our focus tended to be on, are we doing the right activities in job centres? This took us onto a focus on outcomes. Now, the question of targets is one that is, what is the use of targets specifically when you've got such different situations all across the country? You'll have take the interwork rate, which is a crucial metric in that framework. The interwork rate varies very considerably in different parts of the country according to the local labour market, according to the vacancy numbers, according to the number of the nature of the demographics in the place. So what we do with it, rather than setting a national target, is we look at the trends in different places. We can compare and contrast performance in analogous job centres or analogous districts where there's a similar labour market or similar demographics. And you can look at whether a place is improving or worsening on how it is relative to its peers. So that's the nature of the performance discussion. It's not really about a target. An average target wouldn't necessarily help you, given there's so much variation across the country, but a focus on trends and divergent performance really gets into the heart of what's going on.
I didn't actually suggest an average target. Can't you have particular targets, particular job centres in particular circumstances?
Well, Barbara, why don't you talk about how you manage that in practice? I mean, the reality is that you could have a target in a particular job centre, and suddenly an employer closes or vacancies come through, and it becomes meaningless. So it's more the quality of the conversation based on trends and objectives. Because I don't want a situation in which someone says, well, I've hit the target, therefore I'm doing a great job, when there's actually something else going on that's really facilitated that progress, or someone who's missed the target but done all the right things. So the numbers give you an opportunity to get into a conversation, but the real value in terms of driving performance, I've found across the organisation, is in seeing what is going on in terms of trends and comparisons, as opposed to have you hit a target that I set in a different world, in a different situation that may no longer be relevant. I don't want this to I've just found it more useful as a way of driving performance in time.
Right, so how do you have the conversation? How does it work then when you look at a job centre? Obviously you've got the information about how it's performing, and you think it might be performing better or it's doing very well. How do you have that conversation to get that dialogue going, to get the response?
So to give you reassurance, it not only happens weekly and fortnightly, but it happens at every level. So, at the national level, at the district level, at the area level, and at the job centre level. Our work coaches want to deliver well. Our teams really do want to deliver well. So actually performance is really important to them, as well as Peter said, having a quality conversation. So as well as looking at the performance framework that is in the NAO report, we also look at leading indicators, because we know that the feedback that we get from any updates and changes that we make to the performance isn't going to see in the performance framework for another 2 or 3 months when the RTI information comes in. So we absolutely monitor leading indicators. So we look, for example, as well as the clustering that we've talked about, so actually making sure that we're comparing like-for-like job centres. That's got to be the first question. Can we explain why a job centre is performing differently? Is it to do with the deprivation index? Is it to do with the incidence of number of people who don't have English as a first language, for example? These are all restrictions and considerations that we make. And if those differences can't be explained by those societal and environmental factors, then we will also look at, and we do look at, some leading indicators. How much flexible support fund has a job centre invested in? How many sector-based work academy placements have they made? How much are they drawing down on local provision? The number of employers as well. I have to say, one of the things that's really important to us is we could get everybody in the job centre job ready and close to the job, but actually the work that our strategic relationship teams do on employment is as important as is on provision. So when we are managing the performance of a job centre, we look at those external factors, we look at the internal factors, but I think also we look at how. So I spend all of the time with the independent case examiner as well, and with our customer experience teams, because we could get people ready, but actually I'd rather spend more time, effort, energy where we can, making sure that it's the right provision, it's the right conversation that we're having with our work coaches.
I think we might explore the variations and what the course for them just in a little bit more in a minute, but just one of the key indicators, as Sir Peter, you said a few minutes ago, is the interwork rates. Are you concerned that actually the rate's been falling since 21-22? Obviously, changes due to COVID, but it hasn't really recovered, has it?
No, well, it rose immediately after everything opened up, as you'd understand, up above 9%. And that was at a time when there were massive vacancies, and we've seen in the labour market statistics, even last week, the continuing fall in the number of vacancies in the economy. So it does concern me, but I do understand the external factors that are making a difference. What that then means, then gets into the heart of, well, what do we do about it? What do we do about it in DWP, and what do we do about it more broadly across government? And there's a lot of work to be done in terms of the mission-based approach to government, in terms of how do we see the work that's being done in terms of driving some of the progress in some of the key missions, whether it's clean energy, whether it's NHS waiting lists, and how does that play into the opportunity to put people into jobs and create vacancy opportunities for people in our customer base? And Katherine could talk about that in a minute if you like, in terms of how we're working across government. So the answer is, you'll see the labour market more difficult with vacancies coming down will lead to reduction in interwork rates. I want to turn that round. We can work harder, I'm sure, to drive that, but also we can work harder across government to help government create more opportunities and more vacancies for our people to fill vacancies from our customer base.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Joanna, well, you're more than welcome in this committee.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to follow up on, you mentioned there the quality of the conversation and the outcomes for people. You might be aware that the DWP Select Committee has this morning just released a report on safeguarding vulnerable claimants. I wondered if you had any initial reactions to that report in the context of delivering the best that we can for claimants.
Yeah, and I think Debbie's giving a presentation at 11 o'clock this morning to sort of say a bit more about that. I've noticed that it's a 120-page report, so I haven't really managed to work my way through it.
It's a summary at the beginning.
Yeah, I know. And obviously the proposal for a statutory safeguarding duty. Our Secretary of State has said, as part of the Green Paper consultation process, we're looking at how do we strengthen our safeguarding approach. And my main point would be to say we absolutely believe that we have a responsibility to provide a caring environment for the people that we support. And the committee, both this committee and your committee, Ms Baxter, have regularly challenged me in terms of how we're making progress on that. In the annual report and accounts, which we publish in July, we'll say more about the work of the serious case panel, but also how that's helping to drive the improvement in how we train our colleagues, how we make sure that we have support for those customers with complex needs, and make sure that the complex needs are highlighted for any colleague who's engaging with that customer so they know and are fully aware. And that before we make decisions that have an impact on that customer, we have fully considered any complex needs that they have and can take those into account. So there's a lot that we're doing, and we report on that regularly through the minutes of the serious case panel and in the annual report and accounts. But we'll absolutely, I know there's a lot of work that's gone into producing this morning's report, so we'll spend some time reviewing that and reflecting on that, and obviously reflecting on responses to the Green Paper consultation, which also covers this very point.
Thank you. Want me to go on to the next?
Yes, please. Yes.
Yes. So thank you. wanted to talk about the report, paragraphs 3.8 and 3.9, which look at the into-work rates. So 3.8 outlines that the proportion of universal credit claimants who move into work each month has declined since 21-22. How concerned are you about that? And what are the main reasons for the drop in that into-work rate?
Well, Barbara and I regularly talk about the into-work rate, and so when the number starts to go down, it's something that we talk about and try and understand what the reason for that is and what we can do about it. And it's something that the Labour Market Outcome Board that Katherine chairs also reviews, and Katherine might want to say something about that as well. I mean, you've always got to take account of the things that are going on beyond DWP's immediate control. So I mentioned to Mr. Betts a bit earlier about vacancy numbers coming down over that period. They peaked immediately after the pandemic, which probably correlates with the number of 9.7 into-work rate that you'll see in that figure 11 across the page from the paragraphs you're talking about, Ms. Baxter. And then over a period of time, vacancy rates have come down. They've drifted back to where they were kind of pre-pandemic. And that is always going to have an impact on our ability to get people into work. But I mean, Katherine, I don't know whether you've done more work in the Outcome Board.
Yeah, I'll just say a bit more. So we run across the department an Outcome Board that looks at all of our labour market activity, and obviously Jobcentres are an absolutely crucial piece of that, but there is also wider infrastructure that the department funds, and I know your report refers to the extra, I think it's 785 million that we spent in 23-24 on things like Restart, a programme for the long-term unemployed, and things like access to work. So what we try and do is look across the piece at all of that activity and say, is it actually adding up to the positive labour market outcomes that we want? I think on the into-work rate, we've touched on this, but our internal analysis shows that there are definitely drivers of the into-work rate that are external to the department's activity. So obviously the local economy, the composition of the caseload itself, and that, as I said, that wider support system, programmes like Restart, will be contributing to that into-work rate. And we also see things like seasonal fluctuations, so you have to aim off on those. But I think we do know that we are getting a more complex caseload coming through the system, which I'm sure we'll come on to, and we've talked a bit today already about the health and disability issues that we're seeing. So there is a more complex underlying caseload, which is contributing to that. If we are seeing customers that are further away from the labour market to start with, then that will make that into-work rate more challenging. But there are a wider range of activities that we undertake that will influence it, as well as obviously those coaching conversations.
So understand there's multiple issues that would feed into that rate, but you mentioned seasonal fluctuations. I mean, I understand what you mean by that, but the decline over a couple of years is not just seasonal. So I'm just wondering which of the factors then you think might be most prevalent in driving that rate that we're seeing.
I think it's a genuine mix, but I think we should take seriously the more challenging composition of the caseload, because we really are seeing that coming through the system, and that is an active objective of this government to bring into the system, and we'll come on to talk about the future Jobs and Career Service, the mix of people who are at the minute inactive and may not even be interacting with our services. So I think that complexity of the caseload and some of the issues that we're seeing, the complexity and the link between health issues and work issues, is a really big driver. If you look at the inactivity figures, for example, nationally, then we see health and sickness and disability as the biggest driving factor of that increase in inactivity over the last 4 to 5 years. So that's one I would really look out for, and that is what we are looking at internally as well.
Yeah, so I look at 3 things. One is the mental health composition. That seems to have increased incredibly. We've had across the country, we've had a 9.7% increase in the caseload, but actually in places like London it's been over 20%. So it's the big diversity of that. The number of customers that are coming in, as I say, into intensive, and the number of jobs available. Because actually one of the things that we need to do, if you have got a more complex customer, is change the nature of of the jobs. And so we're spending so much time with employers trying to ensure that actually the jobs that are available. So we've been working, for example, with the DVSA on wanting to support them with their drive for recruitment of driving instructors. Actually, how can we broaden the group of people that they typically look at to encourage them to think of job centre customers as part of that. So it's a constant, but they would be my top three that I look at.
I mean, I guess I'm wondering then, given the increase in the number of complex cases, and particularly those with mental health conditions, how that squares with the reduction in the amount of time that work coaches spend with individuals?
Well, the fact is we're doing different things for that customer base. So, for example, we've allocated 1,000 work coaches to be there supporting people on the health journey, and we're doing much more in the way of supporting people and signposting people to specialist support. So all across the country you're seeing these trailblazers that are being developed by local authority regions. 9 of them are focused in on economic inactivity, particularly around health issues. So the point is, it's not just the work coach. The work coach support is there, and there's more of it for people on the health journey. But alongside that, it's developing the provision external to the department that we can signpost people into. And that, I think, is at the heart of this. I mean, how are we going to make progress with helping people who have been a long way from the labour market with complex needs in? It's really not, I mean, the Job Centre plays a massively important role. But more important is the partnerships and the connections with local providers, whether that's the health service, whether that's people supporting those with English as a second language, whether it's housing issues, a whole range of different things. And the great thing about what we're seeing with the trailblazers is there a real opportunity to bring that together in a local area, so you've got joined up provision for the customer and helping them on their journey.
And is there anything, just finally on this section, anything more that job centres can do in the short term to increase the proportion of people moving into work? Appreciating that some of the issues you've spoken about are longer term, but I mean, in order to get that into work rate.
Yeah, I mean, Barbara talked about some great examples that different job centres are trying out that are making a massive impact.
Yeah. So we've got 11 health model offices that are trialling actually what are the interventions that really work with people on health conditions. We're in I can't remember where, in Salisbury, I think it was. We've got and in many areas across the country we are trialling. Work coaches in GPs practices. We are also, one of the things that we've just done is totally refreshed our training for people with complex needs, because we know that this is an area that our work coaches themselves were saying that they needed to. We've also refreshed a complex needs tool as well. That went live about 6 months ago as well. And I think also the local provision is absolutely vital there. So one of the things that our teams do is negotiate locally what is the provision, what are the needs of an individual, and how can they make sure that really brings it to tailored to the individual. Because we could talk about the national programmes, but actually where it really, really makes a difference is where you get an employer, where you get a work coach that feels fully engaged, and where you have got local provision. That's the sweet spot where you really genuinely move somebody closer to the labour market. And so as where we can as possible, and the Jobs and Career Service is moving us towards that, it's really vital that we get all of those ingredients to an individual.
This is at the heart of this, and I'm seeing some brilliant examples of this. So I was in Dover Job Centre just before Easter, and they shared the story of a guy who'd been on their caseload for years and years and years, and yet working with the Port of Dover, giving this individual an opportunity, some work shadowing first of all, and work experience, and then that encouraged the employer to think that yes, this person could be a real asset to the organisation. And there's a wonderful video that the team showed me afterwards with the guy with his employer, and he was talking about how the employer had taken a chance but is really happy with who they've recruited, and for this guy it's transformed his life. Absolutely passionate about the work he's doing and the change that having a job has made. Mm-hmm. And that's because it's exactly Barbara's point, it's not just the work coach. or the job centre on its own. It's being part of a wider community, in that case the employer, working together to help someone move into work. It's win-win, fill a vacancy and you change your life.
And thank you very much. I must applaud all of your efforts to get around the country, going and seeing what's going on the ground. It's really good news to hear that, and I'm sure the people really appreciate when they've got the opportunity to talk to you face to face. So well done on that. Chris Kane is going to ask a quick question, then we're going to have a break shortly after that.
Yeah, can I ask about an NEO paragraph 111? DWP requires its job centres to provide a nationally consistent, centrally defined service, but then we've got the Get Britain Working White Paper, which is looking to work in a more devolved way with moralities and just devolution is increasing. How will your current approach of a nationally consistent, centrally defined service need to change to allow for greater devolution? Don't know if that's Peter or Katherine for that one.
Yeah, Katherine, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so let me talk first of all, as you say, we've got the wider Great Britain Working, and the white paper was published back in autumn. So that sets out the broader range of labour market interventions and activities across the whole of government, both local and devolved. And part of that, obviously a central part of that, is creating a new jobs and career service that will be more locally responsive. Let me just explain what sits around that, and then let's come to the connectivity. So Peter's mentioned the trailblazers. So there are 17 of those, both focusing on inactivity and youth. They're in 17 different mayoral strategic authorities, and those are giving money to the mayoral authorities to have flexibility to try out new and innovative ways of tackling both inactivity and youth unemployment. I should say on that, we will, though, at a national level, bring together a single evaluation, because the whole point is what can the areas learn from each other. Some will naturally be more successful than others. The third and fourth parts of that are delivering a youth guarantee, so the government's wider efforts on youth, partly delivered through job centres and the youth offer, but also a wider range of activities like we have youth hubs around the country. And then we've also launched an independent review headed by Charlie Mayfield, which is looking at the whole employer side of this. We've touched on this several times in this conversation, but it's absolutely critical. Employers are also seeing rising numbers of individuals that are harder to retain with health issues or with disabilities in the workplace. So that review is looking at how we can work with employers in order to tackle that issue. Now, all of that needs to come together into a national and devolved model. And the primary way of doing that is through something called a Get Britain Working Local Plan, which the mayoral strategic authorities are responsible for. Now, they will be working in partnership with the job centre, so the area managers, the regional managers. I've been on a couple of visits recently, both to Newcastle and to Leeds, where we saw sort of brilliant collaboration between local job centres and the mayoral strategic partnerships. Where they showed us, for example, some local hubs, which are very much more common now, with a job centre presence, but perhaps in a library or with GP services all in the same area. So these Get Britain Working Local plans will bring together how those partnerships will work at local area level with the job centre as a key partner. I'll pass back to Barbara to say a bit more, but as part of all of that, we are looking at the national and local responsiveness of the Jobs and Careers Service, because it will need to be more responsive locally to the issues that are outlined in those plans.
We come to Barbara. Can I just check, as a Scottish MP, you are already working in a devolved nation, in a devolved environment. You're going to have to put a resource into this new devolved world in England. Can I just get an assurance that you are aware that you've already got a slightly different way of working in Scotland, and that won't be inadvertently and negatively impacted as you are understandably focusing on getting ready for a new way of working in England?
Oh, absolutely, to give you reassurance on that. Myself and my job share partner were up in Scotland in about 3 months ago talking about exactly this issue. I'm very conscious there is a different level of devolved support there. So yeah, we need to look at this across the nation, absolutely.
If Barbara wants to say anything more.
Yes, did you want to come in on this or not? Well, that's very helpful. A very helpful reply on this devolved, how it's going to work. So the clock is now 11:20. I think if we could be back sort of promptly by 11:25 would be really helpful. So we'll now take a short break and return, as I say, by 11:25. Order. Joanna, please.
Thank you. So just turning to the reforms to employment support, I wonder what you expect the impact of the white paper reforms to have on the number of work coaches that you need and on work coach caseload. And I ask this in the context that of your previous answer earlier this morning around planning your resource around spending reviews, and of course we've got one coming up, so I'm assuming that you will have taken a view in that financial context of the resource that you need, but also in the context of the white paper that's in front of us.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and you're right, we're right in the middle of those conversations. There's a limit to what I can say about those conversations now, but I think the spending review will be concluded in June, so not far off now. The crucial thing, it goes back, answering your question, the crucial thing is to step back and thinking about what that model for the Jobs and Careers Service is. And it's a different model from what we've seen up until now. So that's why it's not straightforward just to say, well, the caseload will be this and therefore the number of work coaches will be that. What we're working on is how do you do something rather more sophisticated and nuanced than the way we've done this before. And that is about saying, particularly in a world where there's more opportunity to use technology in a different way, how do we understand our customers so that we know who are the ones for whom they're motivated, maybe more straightforward situation in their lives, where an online journey could be the answer for them. And there's a lot of work that's been done looking already at what some of the online processes we've got now. So the Jobs and Careers Service have got a brilliant tool to enable you to work through your skills and the careers that you could potentially move to. The opportunity for training courses near you. You put in your postcode and look at training courses that might be appropriate. And then what DWP have is find a job. So if we could put all of that together and do it in a way that nudges people in the right way, you could potentially take a whole group of people who currently go through the work coach process and could be served online with minimal touch points with a work coach. Sure. What that then does, the beauty of that then, is it means our work coaches can spend their time much more intensively on those customers for whom a more detailed and more in-depth conversation is more appropriate. And our ideal, to be honest, is to take the same resource. Obviously, if the Treasury are listening, a little bit more resource would be helpful. But
I was going to press you on this.
The more resource we have, the more we can do and the more quickly we can do it. But the fundamental point here is not sort of seeking a sort of dramatic... We are seeking a dramatic increase in the number of customers we serve and the number of employers who want to use DWP services, but to do that by doing things in a very different way, in the way I've described.
So I understand it's a complex picture, and I understand it's not going to be providing exactly the same service in exactly the same way as what our coaches do at the moment or previously. But given the spending review coming up, is it the case that you think you do need more resource? And if that's the case, how will you monitor and manage the impact on caseload for work coaches?
Well, so we've got an additional 240 million for the year we're in, of which 55 million was for the Jobs and Careers Service. So there's a process of using that money in the way that Barbara described earlier and managed through our investment committee to make sure we're getting the right outcomes from it. But then the crucial thing as part of this work is working out what are the things that we can do differently that may be effective. And that then drives into questions about what are the things that we need to roll out more fully in future years. So in a way, the spending review comes at an inconvenient time in that sense, because we're starting the process. The 55 million became available in the 1st of April. And the process that we're in with the spending review at the moment will set budgets for the 3 years after the 1st of April next year. But we are, as best we can, identifying the sorts of needs that we have, and we're developing it into a phased approach. So through the course of this year, we're doing trials in the way that Barbara described. We've got Pathfinder works in some parts of the country where we're doing things in a very different way. We're developing the digital product by working through what are the types of activity that really help customers and move them on the journey, tailoring it around their needs. That then means when we move into phase 2 of the Jobs and Careers Service, which is 2026-27, that we can then roll out more further the things that we've tried this year that worked, and we can then work on the integration of the National Careers Service with our operation. And then we are planning phase 3 the year beyond that to have a fully online job centre in your pocket, digital offering that brings everything together, that can with the completed rollout in 2028. But that is part of our proposition to the Treasury, and we'll see whether we get the funding that we need to do that.
How realistic is the vision for a universal service which all people can engage with, given the current shortage of work coaches?
Well, as I say, this is down to this. We often describe, don't we, Barbara, as a pyramid, where we think or maybe the pyramid is that way. At the top, you've got a larger number of people who can engage with us digitally. And what we're looking to do is to reach those customers who don't use the job centre at the moment. So, at the moment, the report talks in quite a lot of detail about the different customer groups in Universal Credit who regularly come to a job centre. We want to extend that to people with health conditions. We want to extend that offering to people more broadly, maybe people who aren't on benefits at all but who need help in finding a job. Through to the other end of the spectrum, where it's tailored support, signposting on to the specialist support that might be offered in local areas through the Trailblazer work as well. So it's about taking the existing resource but doing it in a more sophisticated, tailored way. It is completely different from what we've done in the past. And that's why we're taking our time through the course of this year to develop different ways of working, both the two big trials referred to in paragraph 114, but also some of the more local flexibility and changes that different people are doing in different parts of the country.
Yeah, the key things for us is, it's exciting, isn't it? It's a great opportunity for us to be able to kind of test new ways of working. So as Peter, building on from what Peter says, it is about digital. It's also, the thing that I want to build on is actually the impact that it'll have on our work coaches. So there'll be an element of the work coach and the academy on training our staff as well. So that's a lot of what the Jobs and Career Service will look at. But we're taking inspiration internationally as well to see what a public employment service looks like in other countries. So having seen, for example, in Flanders, VDAB actually delivers an independent journey for those people who can self-serve as well. So there's that sort of thinking as well, obviously with our evidence basis from our trials, is really inspiring us to be able to say what are the things that we want to be testing. And that'll obviously have an impact on how many work coaches we have, where they are, where they deliver. So for example, if you go to Newcastle Library, you will see that we've got 3 work coaches in Newcastle Library. So actually one of the things that the Jobs and Career Service is actually looking at is place, and actually how can we take jobs to the people as well as people to the jobs, and that's quite exciting for our teams. Yeah,
and just want to pay tribute to the work coaches in Paisley who are going out into health centres actually in my area. So
it makes a huge difference because
absolutely.
Actually the people are more likely to talk about their barriers with people who they think they can understand.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joanna. Sarah Hall, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming along today. I want to turn back to the support that's available for people with health conditions and disabilities, and specifically, again, looking at the work coaches that have been planned and being rolled out. How do you plan to build your capacity so you can provide more support for people with health conditions and disabilities? And I guess, how do you decide where to place those resources? Is it going to be an even spread? Is it going to be kind of based on need and demand? Or, I think that's to Peter. So Peter,
I start with that, and then Barbara may want to add in terms of how we do it locally. But we started. This is an area where we've been trying this for quite some time in a smaller scale trial. When we published the results in March, it's something that we called additional work coach support, and that was basically taking people who were waiting for a work capability assessment. Or had been found that they were not capable for work at this current time, and working through a conversation with them to think about how we can support them on their journey and what then the outcomes are in terms of finding jobs. And that evaluation that we published in March showed that that type of intervention did make a difference and did have some significant impacts in terms of helping people find work. It's a voluntary offer, but it's there, that's available. And that is, so the next stage is what the ministers have announced, which is the 1,000, as you say, this all work coaches who've been allocated to this. It's approximately 2 per job centre, but Barbara will say a bit about how we actually allocate that in practice. And that is rolling out more firmly that additional work coach conversation with a wider range of customers. And then on top of that, we have the Connect to Work programme, which is being rolled out all across the country this year, which is a tailored support for people who've got health conditions moving into employment, building on that. And then alongside that, we've got the Trailblazers. 9 of those are based on inactivity, particularly around health, in a number of mayoral combined authorities, a number of parts of the country. So all of this together, so some of that provision, as I say, is available right now, so the additional work coach support and the Connect to Work and the Trailblazers. But that is then building towards having an offer for the support that was announced as part of the spring statement by the Chancellor alongside the reforms to disability, which is, I get the number right, 200 million next year?
Yeah.
Rising to £1 billion by the end of the spending review period. And we are consulting on how that money should be used. But also we've got these trials which will enable us to work from what we found works over the course of this year. So that will be in place for the 1st of April. So that is the overall kind of landscape. But Barbara, in terms of how we allocate the 1,000 additional work coaches.
So to answer your question, absolutely, it's about need. So you wouldn't necessarily have them all in the same areas because, as we've talked about earlier, the need is different depending on which job centre, which area. And so that local type, so for example, if you take Manchester, we would work with Mustard Tree, we would work with other organisations in the area and really ask ourselves what are the needs and make sure that we're also upskilling our work coaches in the area. If I think about in Carlisle, we've just set up a specific project with, because they've got need for scaffolders with people who have just come through the gate out of prison as well. So it has to be tailored to the need, and we make sure that we manage that resource effectively, because as we know that the national footprint changes depending on the local location.
And I guess with that as well, in terms of understanding the need of people with health conditions and disabilities, I mean, what work is being done? Is it co-produced support? Is it just understanding exactly, because people have very specific needs, don't they?
Yeah.
And also it's understanding what employment or training is actually appropriate in those different conditions. And I guess the other thing I would say is what work is being done around, including with the workers themselves, having that lived experience maybe themselves with health conditions or disabilities as well.
Yeah, we do. We have a high proportion of our own staff who actually do identify as having health needs themselves, which actually helps with the empathy and means that actually when we are designing and co-designing those services, we have a shadow board for our team, and actually there are members of that team who are specifically there to help us design. So you're absolutely right. I think when we come to some of the trialling that we're doing in our health model offices, they're themselves, not only is it about the provision and how we tailor it and have that conversation locally, because we work with third sector organisation, we work with charities, we work with the RNIB, we work with the King's Trust, for example, lots of organisations that are specifically there to be able to help those people with complex needs and barriers. One of the things that the Jobs and Career Service is looking at is what's the infrastructure that needs to be in place? How do we make sure that we've got the right conversations in place, the right level of investment, the right relationships, and also skilling our leaders as well. So whilst our leaders already do talk to some of the businesses that are in the area, actually what are the conversations that they need to have? Just a final point, if I may. One is that we've invested quite a lot in single points of contact as well within our job centres as well. So we have SPOCs on domestic abuse, we have them on refugees,
employees, for example. And so whilst they will have a caseload of their own, their main job is to be able to advise work coaches when they know they've got somebody with complex needs coming in to see them.
This is an evolving process as well, because obviously needs change. Yeah.
You would expect that as well,
Yeah.
you know. And actually, as I say, given the fact that our needs of our own employees are evolved, then obviously that helps us make sure that we really do have our finger on the pulse of the needs of the locality.
Yeah, and the other, Katherine might want to come in on Connect to Work or the Trailblazers, because they use specialist providers who have got great expertise in particular areas of support.
Yeah, I would just add on all of that. So I think, as we're describing, we see the job centre as a sort of local integrator, but it also refers on to other services. So we've got Connect to Work, where the first site has actually just gone live last month, and that is about it's a place and train model. It's a very intensive model for people who've got a disability to really actually find a job and look at adjustments within that job. We've also, from October last year, are piloting something called Workwell, which is us working in partnership with the Health Service through the ICBs. And that is there for the job centre to refer to, but also there are other referral routes. But that is basically a conversation with a really expert health professional to look at the health and work barriers together. So there are 15 pilot sites, so it would be really interesting to see how that results. But that is part of the wider infrastructure. So I think it's really important to see the services that are around and that the job centres can refer to. And people obviously refer back to the job centre from those other services as well.
Thank you for that. And I suppose, what extent will this redeployment of work coaches result in a further reduction in the support available for other UC claimants?
Yes, I mean, it does do that, but which is where the use of the flexible framework helps us. And as we develop our better understanding about the things, as we reduce some of the frequency in some of those interventions, we go down that ladder that we were talking to Mr. Kane about earlier, I think it was. As we identify, well, we safely did that, and it didn't actually have a detrimental outcome. That then frees up work coach time to then do these other things that we've just been talking about. Mm-hmm. So the experience we've had over the last few months of the flexible framework has enabled us to have more understanding about how we can safely move people off different bits of activity. We don't stop anything, but potentially we reduce the frequency of things. But we can do that safely, freeing up work coach time to do all the things that we've just been describing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I just to follow Sarah's question, I don't mind who answers. It's a relatively simple exercise to tailor needs to resources when you have a sort of relatively stable planned economic situation. What do you do in the case of an unexpected event? A major employer suddenly goes out of business and a huge number of people are suddenly cast onto the jobs market. How do you cope with that?
Yeah, well, in a particular area, Barbara has a rapid response team. So Barbara, why don't you talk about that? And then the more broadly, what have we done in times past where there's a wider economic downturn? That's another question. But where there's a specific in a specific place, it's Barbara's team.
Yes, sadly we've got protocols in place when this happens, because understandably this happens fairly frequently. So we do have a rapid response team. The first thing that they will do is, typically if they've been notified before a major event has happened, they will be able to plan. But typically we will create a pop-up job centre potentially in the location, or actually bring in resource from other job centres. And what we do is we do direct matching. We bring in employers, we will run a job fair, we'll hopefully get information from the employer themselves, but we've got a very targeted work. We'll work with them on pension needs, for example, as well. So we look at the requirements. It very much depends on the circumstances upon which an employer is no longer in existence, and we will tailor our support. But yes, it's a fantastic support that we
Thank you very much. I'm rushing a bit because we're sort of beginning to run out of quorum, I think, and we want to get through everything. But on the question that Permanent Secretary asked himself, which is one I'd been wondering about earlier on, how do you look at sort of statistics and trends? I mean, we've seen in the last unemployment figures that unemployment is going up, vacancies are going down. Looks as though we're getting into a tighter sort of job situation. How do you actually therefore start to plan therefore your needs for job coaches is even greater? How do you start to plan for that?
Well, it's about, as exactly as you say, Chair, looking at the early warning indicators One of which is those applications for universal credit at the start. So it's not data that we publish, but it's sort of early warning data that is kind of real time, whereas some of the labour market statistics, there's a lag because they look back rather than looking in the current situation. So that's what we do. We look at the administrative data as well as the published economic data, and we make sure that we are able to talk to colleagues in the Treasury about what they're seeing as well, and understanding their view about the wider economy and how that's going to play into the labour market. I mean, let's hope this doesn't happen, but in the past, where we've seen economic downturn, the Treasury have then been willing, picking up on Mr. Bett's question a bit earlier, they then have been willing to say, right, we can see there's an urgent need and get on and recruit. So, for example, back in 2020, when we agreed to double the number of work coaches in the middle of the pandemic, the Treasury were willing to provide the money because they could see the value of acting fast and helping people, if they fall out of work, to quickly bounce back into something else where that's possible, rather than the risk of people falling into long-term unemployment. And they know that the work of job centres in those situations can make a massive difference.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Joanna, please.
Thank you. So just on the new Jobs and Careers Service, so obviously we've touched on this a little bit throughout the session. What's the timetable for setting that up?
Yes, it's the point. I talked a bit earlier about the phases, and that was really relating to answering that question, actually. So phase one is as we use the £55 million that we've talked about already, which is partly around trying different things in what we're calling Pathfinder sites. It's also developing a coaching academy and putting the first set of work coaches through that to really improve the way that we, if you think about the Jobs and Career Service with more of a focus on those people who most need it, how do we make sure that when we do coaching, we're doing the very, very best coaching that we can? So developing some of that, and then alongside that, it's the digital spend. So it's looking at some of the existing offers that are already in place in the National Career Service and in DWP and elsewhere, and working out in a user-based way, how do we make sure that we're developing services that meet the needs? I mean, we could come up with something, but we need to make sure that as we come up with it, we are doing it in a way that we know will work for those people who could be independently finding a job without a lot of work coach support. So this is the year of trying different things out and working them through. Phase two is then taking the things that we've found have worked and then looking to roll them out at a bit more scale. And also so that's in 2026, 27, and at that point looking at how we integrate the National Career Service in with the wider DWP offer. Phase three is the year after that, where we're looking to have the digital offer fully in place end to end, which we're calling Job Centre in your pocket. And then phase four is making sure it's fully there by 2028, 29, the Jobs and Career Service in the way we'd want it to be. And that is also my proposition to the Treasury, but it's dependent on getting the funding as well to make a reality of that. But that's the plan that we've got set in terms of getting from where we are now to where we want to get to. And at the heart of it is an approach of tailoring what we do according to what works and what meets the needs of customers, and not necessarily relying on doing these big long-term randomised control trials, which is what we've relied on in the past, because they are very robust, they're evidence-based, but they take such a long time that to get something in place, you need to do a combination of that and the things I've just described.
So how are you going to measure the success of the service? I mean, bearing in mind that it won't be fully operational until that phase 4, 28-29. I understand and appreciate that you're going to be kind of testing things as you go through, but once we've got it, how are you measuring the success of the service?
Yeah, really, really good point. So there are two levels here. One is how are we measuring progress on the whole Get Britain Working agenda, which Katherine can talk about, which is around this ultimate aim of 80% employment rate.
Yeah, I was going to come on to that.
Okay,
yeah.
well, we can come to that later. But anyway, there are 8 metrics that we've set out that address that. The Jobs and Career Service plays its part within that with what we're calling the 3 E's, which Barbara will remind me what the 3 E's are.
Employment, engagement and...
Sorry, I didn't catch the first one then.
Employment, engagement and earnings. So those were the key objectives set out in the white paper back in autumn for the Jobs and Career Service.
Just see how
set out. It's actually in paragraph
repeated
170. Do you want to say a little about how we're measuring against those?
So, I mean, employment, engagement, and earnings. We haven't actually. We as we're evolving through the test and learn. One of the things that we are testing and learning is the metrics. As Peter said earlier, one of the things that we want to do is make sure that whatever metrics we use are relevant and give a good litmus test as to how well we're delivering. But actually, the thing that I'm really interested in is, does it breed the right behaviour? I don't want to be having metrics that maybe don't, in our work coaches that we want to be able to make sure that we are aiming for the right outcomes. So I don't have more on that at the moment. That's one of the things that we're doing in parallel to the testing and learning is actually testing and learning the metrics.
I mean, I guess looking at it from a claimant point of view, there's something there about how we measure the sustainability and the quality of employment that people then move into. So I'm wondering if there's a view in the department about how you would measure that. Is it the amount of time people then spend in that role that they then secure through the new Jobs and Career Service? Is it that they're still in employment 2-5 years down the line? How are you measuring the sustainability of work that people are moving into?
So if you look at figure 10, it's got the framework, the post-November 23 framework. So in the second, if you look at the second half of that table, it's looking at sustaining increase in earnings over 3 months and getting and growing. So partly it's about over from 1 month to the next, that's the interwork rate, but then we're also looking at sustainability beyond that over 3 months.
Okay.
So those are specific metrics, but the place I would start, going back to maybe the question you're going to ask, but the place I would ask is go back to is the 80% employment rate, and how do we get to that point? And that is all about looking at those places or those groups where the employment rate is below 80%, and seeking to act in those areas in a way to narrow the gap. But Katherine may want to say more.
Shall I say more?
Yeah, please. I mean, my question was around how big a challenge it will be to get to that.
Yeah, so, I mean, it clearly is a stretching aspiration, and it has been set as an aspiration. And you'll have seen the employment rate figures that came out earlier this week. As Peter touched on, the fact of the matter is the UK does have some areas and localities with an 80% employment rate, but it also has some with a very, very different, much lower employment rate. So the metrics and the ambition that the government has set for us, and I'll talk about the metrics in a second, is really focused at how do you bring those areas, those localities and the characteristics of the individuals that coincide with that up to a higher level. So that is what the whole of Get Britain Working is really about. How do you bring that level up across the board? So that's why the government has set out 8 metrics. So these were published last month, and these are about the Get Britain Working agenda as a whole, about the labour market as a whole. And what those do is those focus on those particular groups and characteristics that have a less good employment rate. So there's a metric about basically reducing the gap between the median and the bottom 10% in terms of places. And then there are particular metrics which are about characteristics, so bringing the health-related inactivity rate down, bringing the disability employment gap down, and bringing the proportion of young people not in education, training or employment down, and also employment among parents and the female employment rate. So those metrics try and focus on the characteristics that tell us where the barriers are, but that is the whole point of having a place-based and a kind of characteristic-based strategy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Sarah Hall, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to turn briefly to Job Centre funding. Katherine, my question is to you. How much extra funding are you expecting to put into Job Centres?
In terms of the future? So I think, as Peter alluded to earlier, we're in the middle of a spending review discussion and negotiation with colleagues at the Treasury. So We've made a proposition which will allow us to build on the 55 million that's been included this year for further transformation, and also for a number of work coaches which we think will allow us to manage the demand coming through. But obviously we don't yet know the result of those conversations with the Treasury. We also, within that whole conversation, are talking about the future of the other pieces of funding that we've alluded to today, so things like the Trailblazers, Restart, Connect to Work, all of those programmes. So that is all subject to that discussion that is very live, but will be concluded in a matter of weeks.
Okay. And in terms of the 55 million that's been made available, what progress has been made in deciding how to use that? I guess it's probably more for you, Barbara.
So I think I mentioned earlier, so as Peter quite rightly said, we are carefully drawing down on that and making sure that we have got business cases available to do that. At the moment, we want to use that money not only for the digital tools, but also to look at what are the improvements in coaching and actually how do we train our customers for the regime and for the service that we're going to be delivering going forward. It is seed funding. We are hoping to be able to find ways in which we can do more investment, but that's where we are at the moment, and it's probably proportionate for where we are in the maturity of where our thinking is through the testing and learning. But Peter might want to come in.
Well, no, just the specifics. We described it as the pathfinder work in some parts of the country, the coaching academy, and then the development of digital services. Those are three of the crucial elements of the 55, the drawdown of the 55 so
They're the
far.
priorities coming forwards.
Yeah,
in that
and then we'll
tranche.
see. And the way we're doing it, as I say, closely controlled by my investment committee, is to make sure that the money is allocated in packets as proposals come along. So we haven't fully allocated the 55 just yet. It's there to be drawn upon by good proposals coming forward by different parts of the organisation. But the things which we're focusing on so far are the three that we've just described.
So those are the priorities, but the rest of the money hasn't been kind of ring fenced for anything else. It's going to be dependent on what's identified as need.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got one pathfinder that we're just putting in place now. If that is successful, we'd love to do something else in another part of the country and go further. Started with the coaching academy in one place, looking at where we can go further on that. It all depends on whether the early work shows that what we're trying out is making a difference, and then we can then justify rolling it further. But the crucial thing, following the theme that the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster said, we want to innovate and try new things, but recognise that some things won't work. Okay, we'll recognise that quickly, stop that, but pile in behind the things that do seem to work. And that's really the thinking about the 55 million.
Thank you.
Sarah, thank you very much. I think we're soon going to have to draw this to a close, but just three questions to me, to any of you who wishes to answer, about how you're going to make the existing system better. And where I want to start, I think, is looking at work capability assessments and fit notes. Have you any proposals to alter the current system?
Well, in regards to the way Jobcentres work, a great example, Barbara talked about one already, but a great example I saw was in Poplar, where we are based in the community centre built by the Poplar Harker Housing Association, but across the way there is a GP surgery, and we have representatives of the Job Centre in that surgery. And what that then means is that when customers come in for a fit note, they get the fit note from the doctor, but then they can be referred to a DWP colleague who's there on site and say, but wouldn't you like to have a conversation about work, what you can do? And so we engage people where they are. We're not expecting people to come into the job centre itself. We're engaging people where they are. So that is that is just one example of the sort of culture and way of working that I'd love to see the job centre of the future represent. So that's sort of one example of that. Obviously, in terms of more broadly about work capability assessments and PIP, we've got the Green Paper consultation underway, so there's obviously further work there. But I just thought in terms of the role of job centres, and I know colleagues have talked about that in your constituencies as well. This is happening all over the place. we're finding the opportunity to take work coaches out of a job centre with their caseload, and you can have a different type of conversation with customers in different settings.
Now, we're all in favour of innovation on this committee. A couple of 3 questions. Why is the evidence base for your current modelling of supporting claimants so old?
Well, the reason for it is because it is a big exercise to do it. Because what you're basically trying to do is you're trying to compare over a period of time with a big enough evidence pool the impact of one set of interventions with one group of people with a set of interventions with a different group of people who look very similar but don't have those interventions. So you have to have the interventions and not do the interventions for the control group for a period of time. Then you have to then leave a while before you can then see what the impact of that was in terms of the success rate of those 2 cohort groups. So it takes a long time to do and to get the results. And also, what you end up... it is a difficult one. More recently, we've done propensity testing, which is easier in a way, but where you're basically saying, I know that this person should have this intervention, but I'm deliberately not going to give it to them because I want to see what the impact is of not giving it to them compared to a different group who I am giving it to, creates other issues as well. So they're important because they are the gold standard of evidence base, and they are the bedrock of the regime that we've been running over many years. But and as I say, we're doing the 2 that are described in the report, but alongside that, we want to get a bit more agility and try things in a different way so we can get some results more quickly to enable us to develop the service in the way I was describing to Ms Baxter more quickly.
I understand the difficulties, Permanent Secretary, but without evidence, how will you make sure that you provide a better service?
Well, it is about evidence, but evidence that we gather comparing and contrasting over shorter time periods and in doing different things in different places so we can get a comparison group. So the sorts of things we're trying, we'll have the core regime in one place and will be deviation from the core regime in another place, and then you can compare the outcomes in that way as well, and we're trying to do that more quickly. The problem with it, the result won't be gold standard. There'll be a lot of kind of assumptions that you're basing into that. But sometimes the best is the enemy of the good. And I think this is what we're trying out here. Can we do things in a more agile way, trying things, testing as we go along? When things haven't worked, because what we've tried isn't as good as the core regime we're trying over here, right, quickly, let's stop it. Actually, this one worked more effectively. And to be honest, the results that, in the popular example, the results that I saw in terms of having conversations with a work coach in a setting that is not the job centre seem to be making a big difference for people who are long-term unemployed. So across the way from the GP surgery, we were in the community centre. Upstairs, there's ESOL classes going on. Downstairs, there are digital classes going on. There's classes in terms of how do you cook on a budget for a family. There's the housing association already there. You can come to one place as a long-term unemployed person. You can have a conversation about jobs and you can get supported in all different ways in one setting. And the outcomes that Barbara's colleagues were seeing in that place, I didn't have a randomised control trial, I didn't have the full, but they were just saying, I'm seeing these individuals who I never thought would get a job, they're getting a job. It's worth doing. So that's the nature of some of these test and learn trials that we're doing in the short term.
Understood. I can see certain colleagues getting twitchy, need to go. So the very last question is, you talked about the green paper and we've talked about evaluation. What sort of timescale is your best guesstimate when we might see the results of some of these innovative ways of working?
Oh, okay. Well, the green paper on health and disability, the consultation is a 12-week consultation, and that began at the beginning of April. So carries through to the end of June, and then the government will need to make decisions off the back of that. But in terms of some of the innovative things that we've been talking about more broadly, we'll hopefully be seeing those as we move through the different phases that I described as we roll out the Jobs and Careers Service. So we'll be seeing things in different places at different times, and we can share examples in your constituencies if that would be helpful as well.
That is very helpful. Can I thank colleagues for their forbearance? It's been a quite tricky session, but can I thank particularly our witnesses? It's been a very interesting session. We've covered a lot of ground and you've been very candid with your answers, so we do thank you for that. An uncorrected transcript of this hearing will be published on the committee's website in the coming days. The committee will obviously consider the evidence that you've so carefully provided today and will produce a report, no doubt, with recommendations in due course. Thank you again.